Now we're going to turn to the public session, and I'm going to invite up our first panel, which will be Andrew Hoppin, Donn Morrill, and Aaron Brown. And I just want to remind you gentlemen that we're going to have to put you on a 3-minute limitation. My apologies in advance. But again, we have to relinquish the room at some point. It's nice to see you all, and welcome. So why don't we just start right over here. Go right ahead.
Great, thank you. My name is Donn Morrill. I'm the founder and chairman of the New York Technology Council, a trade association whose mission is to help make New York a world-recognized center of excellence for technology. Founded in 2009, NYTEC today boasts 250 member companies and is proud to include among its founding sponsors Google, Verizon, Information Builders, Citibank, and others. I would like to thank the Council for allowing me to speak today on this important topic. As I'm sure everyone on this Council is already aware, open data initiatives are taking hold across the country. From the California Open Government Directive S-2009 to the federal government's Data.gov data portal, governments are beginning to realize the societal benefits of open data standards. Indeed, New York City, as Commissioner Post has indicated, New York City has already begun to dip its toe into the oceans of data rightfully belonging in the public space. Last year's Big Apps competition invited entrepreneurs from around the city to develop software applications based on publicly available data sets from New York City agencies. The competition was a huge success, garnering dozens of submissions, 80 apparently, and paving the way for the recently announced New York City Entrepreneurial Fund and a $300,000 investment in one big app company. There is no debating the positive impact of this program. To paraphrase perhaps the greatest business leader of our time, the pointy-haired boss from Dilbert, this bill is low-hanging fruit and a win-win. It will empower synergies, shift paradigms, develop core competencies, and encourage out-of-the-box thinking. In short, this bill is a good idea. This should not be a contentious bill. No one will lose a vote. No one will lose an endorsement. No one will lose $1 of financing by supporting this bill. What you will gain is recognition from the community that your affirmative role will open doors for enterprising companies to develop new and exciting ways to experience New York City. Without this law, left to their own devices, some city agencies, such as those already participating in big apps, would no doubt take the initiative and release valuable data sets for public consumptions. Others, however, will be less than cooperative. A city mandate to publish these data sets would serve to overcome the petty bureaucracies and misguided excuses that frequently mire such programs. Government regulation frequently lags technological changes. By enacting this legislation, you have the opportunity to break that trend and ensure that great New York City takes the lead in recognizing the power of technology to build trust in government, foster innovation, and improve the society with which we live. I encourage the full Council to pass this important piece of legislation soon. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Garodnick, Councilmember Brewer, and the rest of the committee. Thank you on behalf of Google for the opportunity to be here and to testify on this important issue. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm a senior product manager at Google, based here in New York City. As you know, Google has a major presence in the city with over 2,000 employees, our second largest worldwide office here, and we're very excited to be part of the city community and to participate in important discussions like this. At Google, we're very familiar with the power of data. We use it extensively to build our own products, and perhaps more importantly for this discussion, we build and make available platforms and tools to help others make data more accessible and transparent, whether it's through Google Maps or Google Applications or purpose-built data sharing platforms like our Fusion Tables and Public Data Explorer. We do all of this because we recognize the importance of openness, transparency, and broad-based innovation around data, and we want to help further promote those goals. Our perspective has always been that citizens should be just one search away from all online public information, and we've worked with many state local governments over the past years to help encourage those principles. For example, we've partnered with state governments to help them expose more data behind web forms and firewalls to search so that constituents can find it. We've recently partnered with the state of California around their Apps for California's initiative, where they've published a number of electronic data sets in our platforms that are made it easier for constituents to build innovative apps quickly on top of it. We worked with the Census Bureau, the CDC, and others to create interactive visualizations that bring population data to life and shed new light on inequities and opportunities in that data. We've also seen many cases where public access to data has helped everyone from journalists to businesses to academics and grassroots organizations to take public data and quickly create compelling presentations. So all of these projects were made possible by the open electronic availability of public data and by the innovation from entrepreneurs that comes when they have access to it. There's an important pattern here, one that we think is important to encourage, where open data is driving innovation. And as such, we are very supportive of the goals of Intro 29 and look forward to any opportunity we might have to work with the city, should it pass, to collaborate on making New York City a beacon community in its support and availability of open data. I would like to comment before wrapping up on a few of the provisions in Intro 29 that, based on our experience as technologists, are particularly critical to its success. The requirement that data be available in a form supporting automated processing, the requirement for API access to the data, and the requirement that public data sets be accessible to search. We recognize that the cost to implement some of these provisions can be non-trivial. We believe it's important to set goals to achieve them, even if they're phased over time. And we'd encourage the department to leverage the private sector where possible to accelerate this process, perhaps working with Google and others in the industry that already have scalable open platforms with APIs to make data available. So to conclude, I'll just reiterate my support for Intro 29, and I hope the perspective I provided today has been useful. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Right on the buzzer. Thank you. Go ahead, Adrian.
Hi. Thank you for having me here today. So in the New York State Senate, the number one...
Why don't you identify yourself first?
I'm Andrew Hoppin, the Chief Information Officer of the New York State Senate. The number one project that has delivered value out of our work in technology over the last 2 years in the New York State Senate, in my opinion, has been our open data effort. So with opendata.nysenate.gov, we publish all of our administrative data, how much I get paid, how much money we spend on everything, in a searchable, sortable, downloadable, mashable form. Similarly, our work product as a legislature, all of our legislation is now available for free as feeds, also with what we think is a fairly intuitive search interface and with an application programming interface so that third parties can build applications on top of that data. And we were able to accomplish all of that in less than a year, and actually we're able to net save money in our technology spending in the bargain just because of the way that we did it and in concert with other modernizations of our enterprise IT. So all of which is to say we care about this deeply and we believe in it. And I think the relevance of that experience to New York City, which is admittedly a much larger, more complicated set of data to consider publishing in this manner, is that you can start small and you can start modestly and you can do this work efficiently if you look to the best practices that are being created by our peers in other governments elsewhere. This work is happening all over the country right now, and New York would not be alone. It would have an opportunity to lead, but would also be able to leverage off of a lot of work going on within government and within the private sector. And so I think that the complexity and the cost should not be impediments to going down this road, because I think you'd get a lot of help in doing it. Also, another plug for governments as a customer, governments outside of New York City. Governments need to collaborate effectively across different levels of political geography, local, state, and federal. And I think that one of the greatest benefits of opening up New York City's data will be an enhancement of your ability to collaborate with your peers at other levels of government. And certainly we count ourselves at the state level as being, very interested stakeholders and potential collaborators of that data product. And then finally, in terms of process, I would just encourage you to minimize the temptation to adjudicate what's going to be of value and what is not going to be of value. Because really the point of pushing this data out in a way that other people can leverage it is that they will come up with the innovation that otherwise civil servants would have to come up with, and we'll never have all of the smartest brains within government. We'll never be able to hire enough people to do all of the work that we might like to do. So as much as possible, really focus on getting the data out in a mashable form. And so I think having an API for city data would be really exciting. And I think it would be great to collaborate with other government entities in the private sector in developing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just follow up on that point, Mr. Hoppin, on the subject of minimizing the temptation to make the decisions ex ante for the public about what is or should be made available. You heard the Commissioner talk about reasonable limits and also value to the public. Can you envision any reasonable limits that could or should be placed on these data sets? She testified there was nothing in particular that she had in mind, but that agencies might come up with reasonable limits. From where you sit, and I pose the same question to the other gentleman, is there such a thing as a reasonable limit here?
So two things. One, I think certainly when individual citizen information comes into play, there are reasonable privacy and security questions that need to be answered. But the lion's share of the data that I've seen governments publish effectively that's delivered value does not pertain to individual citizen information or records. In terms of the way that I think you can address the obvious need to start with the low-hanging fruit and to start somewhere and not let the perfect be the enemy of the good is to make decisions about what to focus on first as part of an open collaborative process. Use the same process that you hope the data will ultimately be used within, meaning if you publish a catalog of the data that's available, take public input on what is of value, you'll start the process of people thinking about and weighing in on what might be valuable in that manner, rather than having that process go on behind closed doors. And then the other thing is, I think, to build your systems that are going to publish this data, build your API in a way that anticipates that everything is ultimately going to be published. And so that you've built infrastructure that supports you going towards that goal over time.
Just reiterate the point of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. We've seen in our experience that getting data out, even if it's not in the most perfect form with all the APIs available, starts the process of innovation and provides a lot of insight into how to drive it forward long term. So again, design for the future, but don't let that hold back the initial exposure of data to the community.
Clearly, once the data has been vetted for privacy and security concerns and it's put out in the wild, people have a tendency to use data to tell the story they want it to tell. And we need to differentiate between the creative use of data, perhaps, to tell one side of a story, as that could still be a proper use of data. So differentiating between a truly improper use of data and just creatively massaging data, perhaps, to tell a story that might not be a very popular story, we need to be careful to differentiate between those two.
Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you. I'm impressed that the commissioner is still here. And Andrew Hoppin, the New York State Senate gets a bad rap sometime. I think they should just mention you, and then they'd all be happy. The issue of Google and the MTA, how has that experience how could it provide an example of what could go on in terms of what we talked about today? Because people are very pleased with the MTA data.
So that's to me. So I'm actually not been involved with the MTA's project and Google's involvement there, so I can't speak to that directly. What we have seen with other data sets is that putting them in platforms that are web accessible and friendly to consumers and small organizations like Google's has been very energizing to the community and presumably same.
And in places like large states like California and so on, where you mentioned in your testimony, how, again, does that serve as an example as to what is or isn't possible in New York, just generally?
I think the great example of California is that California started by putting data out, 400 or so data sets, and did not have APIs available, and so there were challenges in getting the pace of innovation going. By working with us, they were able to basically simply transfer that data into our platforms, which already provided open APIs, and as such, they didn't have to invest in the creation and building of those APIs. We just essentially gave it to them for use, and so citizens could then move much more quickly in point-and-click visualization without programming, without a lot of the work that would happen if they had to build it out themselves. So it's just an accelerator to innovation.
Okay. And Andrew, is the state doing anything close to what you're doing? You're working on the Senate side, legislation, and so on. But is the state doing anything that, to the best of your knowledge?
Not in a comprehensive, across-the-board way in the executive branch. I sit on the statewide CIO Leadership Council, and we were having a lot of conversations about this. And I think one of the exciting things is if New York City moves aggressively in this arena, you're going to be moving in parallel with a lot of peers at other levels of government. And again, that's where the real upside of massive efficiency and I think potentially even massive cost savings can come from freeing this data, because you're not going to have these, you're talking about unwinding silos here where you may have had a city department not being able to readily share data with another city department. You unwind that inherently if you publish this data openly. You're also breaking down the wall between government and non-government. But I really think breaking down the wall between local, state, and federal has tremendous potential upside. And it's hard to measure that until it's done, right? But it's a really timely time to be looking at this because of what I think will happen also eventually at the state level.
And Donn, congratulations on all the work that you've done to put together everyone. But the question I have is, do you get in some of your discussions around the table and in the forums, people who state, if I only had this data, I could do this and this in terms of apps? Or is it, obviously 200 are available, but are there discussions about other apps, do you think?
I get that in a general sense. I don't get a lot of that type of discussion around city data in particular. I can tell you that there was overwhelming good experience with the big apps competition. I've heard nothing but positive things, nothing but positive outcomes, and I think that is really the genesis of this whole movement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. One last question from me for Mr. Brown. You noted that there is a potential delay associated with mandating APIs from day one. Obviously, having them in place is of great appeal and of great usefulness. How concerned do you think we should be about that, and what would be your recommendation as to whether or not we should create the firmest, most restrictive, put it in right at the beginning? What would you say to that?
So I recommend a phased approach, much like is described in the Intro 29 for the data availability itself, such that there's a grace period before API requirements are in place, but that those requirements are defined and made clear goals that by a certain time period, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever might make most sense, that those APIs are required and available. My point in the testimony is basically not to halt release of data while a long, drawn-out process happens to determine and to standardize APIs.
And you think that the time necessary to put them in place is measured in months or a year or 2 years as opposed to anything longer than that?
It depends on what APIs are chosen. For example, Google Fusion Tables, our publishing product, has open APIs, and if those were adopted, as the state of California is starting to do, they could be available in a matter of hours, frankly.
Okay. Well, we thank you for that, and we thank all of you for your testimony today, and we're going to move on to our next panel, so we appreciate it.